Fisherman saves dog 185 miles offshore and uncovers a shocking secret in its metal. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. The waves slammed hard against the deck of his boat. The rain, relentless, blurred the sky. And yet in the middle of the chaos, Nathan Brooks saw something impossible. A figure struggling in the waves, fighting not to be swallowed by the dark foam. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. It couldn't be. A German shepherd, more than 200 miles from the coast, an animal adrift, torn apart by cold and salt. Its paws barely kept up with the current, its eyes, two glints of anguish and determination, locked onto Nathan's for an endless moment. Without thinking, without calculating, without even wondering what a dog was doing in the open sea, Nathan jumped. The leap was brutal, as if he were cutting through the liquid fabric of the world with his own body. The cold hit him like a slap. He swam hard against the current, guided by the instinct of someone who's lost too much to let another soul sink. The waves pulled him eastward, but he kept going. The dog, malnourished, couldn't fight anymore. Its paws trembled, its snout dipped under every second. Nathan reached it just as its body started to sink. He held it with one arm, swimming with the other, feeling how the weight of that creature was also the weight of something more, something the sea itself didn't want to give back. Half an hour later, exhausted, his lips purple and muscles on the verge of collapse, he managed to haul it onto the Hope. The creature lay still, but alive. Nathan, shivering, covered its body with a thermal blanket he kept for emergencies. As he leaned closer, he noticed something, a metal chain corroded by salt and hanging from it, a round tag. A single letter etched on it, G. "Who are you? Old sea wolf?" Nathan muttered, his voice cracked from the effort. The dog, as if it understood, opened its eyes. No whimpers, no barks, just a piercing, watchful stare that gave Nathan goosebumps. That night, as the storm calmed and stars began to peek timidly through the clouds, Nathan knew his life, grey, lonely and doomed to the routine of the sea, had just changed forever. The morning sun warmed the dock, a sharp contrast to the brutal night before. Nathan Brooks, his new name for a life far from his past, pushed open the door of the small coastal vet clinic, carrying the unconscious German shepherd wrapped in a salt-stained, soaked blanket. A soft bell above the door jingled, drawing Dr. Emily Harper, a woman with sharp features, calm eyes and blonde hair tied back in a messy bun. Born in Ohio but raised on the coast, Emily had moved here seeking quiet, unaware that quiet often hides the deepest cries. "What the heck? Nathan, is that a dog?" she asked, stepping forward briskly. "I found him in the middle of the ocean, miles from shore," Nathan replied, his voice rough, eyes still red from salt and sleeplessness. Emily frowned as she touched the animal. Its coarse fur, marked with scars, hid tight, precise muscles like they'd been carved through intense training. One eye had a grey haze, maybe from an old injury or a botched surgery. The other, though, watched everything with sharp intelligence. "This isn't just any dog," Emily muttered, examining him with surgical care. "He's got micro-fractures in his front legs, calluses from combat, and this." She held up the tag hanging from his neck. The letter G etched into the metal seemed to hum with a story it wasn't ready to tell. "You think he's military?" Nathan asked, slumping into a metal chair, still in his drenched jacket. "Military, or something worse. This dog was trained to obey without fail. Look." She gently lifted the dog's paw. "There's a tiny scar right where they'd implant tech under the skin." The dog, still weak, opened his eyes slowly, and there it was, that stare. Not begging, not scared, but calculating, watchful. Like even at his most vulnerable, he knew every exit, every shadow, every person in the room. Emily lowered her voice, almost to a whisper. "Even asleep. He's still on guard. That's not instinct. That's muscle memory." Nathan swallowed hard, unable to look away from the dog. Something about him sent a shiver through him, not fear, a strange kind of awe, like he was facing a survivor of a war no one else had seen. Hours later, back by the coast, as the sea gently lapped at the rocks, Nathan watched the dog lying on a blanket by the fire. The animal hadn't moved in an hour, but his eyes, always alert, tracked him. Every crackle of firewood, every shadow dancing on the wall, made the dog react. Small, subtle, but never missing a beat. "What did they do to you out there?" Nathan asked, as if the wind could carry his question to some lost sea god. The The dog raised his head slowly, and in a move that froze Nathan's blood, placed a paw on his boot. It wasn't a plea, it was a vow. And somehow, without knowing how or why, Nathan knew this bond, just born, was unbreakable. This dog, lost in the depths of the sea, had been forged to protect. But now maybe he was the one who needed protecting. Dawn brought a deceptive calm. Seagulls circled the harbor as if nothing had happened, ignoring the fact that in the small cabin by the cliffs, a story was starting to unearth itself from the silence. Nathan Brooks, still tasting the salt of the sea in his throat, watched the German shepherd from his window. The dog, whom he'd instinctively started calling Guardian, sat by the door back to the sea like he was shielding the house from more than just waves. Over breakfast, lukewarm coffee and stale bread, Nathan noticed something odd. Every time he moved through the house, Guardian's eyes followed, even in dim rooms. The sound of his steps didn't seem to escape the dog's sharp ears. He decided to dig for answers. Hours later, he parked his rusty pickup outside a rundown auto shop on the edge of town. A faded sign hung crookedly, "Mike Sullivan, Repairs and More." Mike was a war veteran, tall with a white beard and tired eyes. Nathan knew him from his days as a rescue diver in joint military ops. They avoided talk of the past, but Nathan knew Mike still had contacts and sharp instincts. "Don't tell me you're here about a boat engine," Mike grumbled, wiping his hands on a greasy rag as Nathan walked in. "Nope, I'm here about him." Guardian stepped in behind Nathan, moving with a steady, almost military stride. Mike raised an eyebrow. "Damn, where'd you get that?" Nathan summed up the story: the storm, the rescue, the tag. Mike didn't blink once during the tale. "Show me the tag," he said, and when he held it, he frowned. "This metal's not standard. It's titanium with a silicon insert, pressure sensitive. Check this out." He pressed the edge with a thin tool, and a tiny slot opened on the back. Inside, a microchip sealed in waterproof resin gleamed faintly under the light. "That's defense tech. Experimental, nothing civilian." Mike knelt by the dog, lifting a paw without touching it. Controlled movements. Eyes trained to read gestures, not vocal commands. This dog, he was part of something big and dangerous. Nathan swallowed hard. The silence grew heavy. "What kind of program?" Mike stood, walking to a shelf stuffed with folders and forgotten war relics. He pulled out a crumpled, faded document and set it on the metal table. "Project Nightfall, joint training for tactical operatives with animal assistance." But these weren't just tracking dogs. They were built to work with agents who had disabilities, especially visual ones. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. Tactical guides. Exactly. They didn't just see for their partners, they defended them, guided them through urban battlefields. Their ability to predict enemy moves was almost uncanny. Mike leaned toward Guardian, who met his gaze without fear. "This is one of them, and he shouldn't be alive." Silence settled again. "What if they're looking for him?" Nathan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mike nodded slowly. "They already are, and they're not after the dog. They're after what he's carrying." The wind had shifted, not just in direction, but in purpose. Nathan Brooks felt it as he left Mike's shop, like the air itself had taken on a new weight, heavy with omens. Guardian's presence, always alert, grew stiffer, his ears perked, his back taut, like a live wire at the slightest sound. Back at his cabin, Nathan started noticing things he'd overlooked before. Unfamiliar tire tracks in the wet mud, fresh boot prints by the shed, and a fleeting shadow that vanished into the trees at dusk. It wasn't paranoia. Someone was watching. The next day, during a routine checkup with Dr. Emily Harper, Nathan shared what he'd learned. Emily, used to handling the quiet pain of animals and the distrust of broken men, listened without interrupting, her face still. "A secret project with tactical guide dogs?" she asked finally, like someone who didn't want to believe but couldn't deny it. "And you're saying this Guardian was part of it?" Nathan nodded, his eyes a mix of fear and resolve. "Not just that. Mike says, maybe they're not after him, they're after what he's carrying." Emily leaned in to check the implant again, this time under UV light. A flash, a faint blue signal blinked for a second. "This isn't just an ID chip. It's a transmitter, sealed, inactive, until now." Right then, the clinic's bell rang with eerie precision. 3 figures walked in. They weren't locals. Their clothes were too plain, too calculated. Cold faces, measured movements. The man in front, tall with neatly combed hair, gave a plastic smile. "Sorry to bother you, we're looking for a fisherman. We heard he might be here with a dog found at sea." Nathan felt Guardian's body tense like a violin string. Without a sound, the dog slid between him and Emily, positioning himself directly in line with the stranger. The man noticed, and for a split second, his eyes darkened. "May I?" He reached toward the dog. Guardian growled. Not a normal growl. A warning. A verdict. The second man, shorter and stockier, stepped forward. From his pocket, he pulled a small black device the size of a lighter. He activated it. A high-pitched beep, almost inaudible to humans, filled the room. Guardian faltered. His whole body seemed to lock up. For an endless moment it looked like he'd obey, but then something shifted. The dog's eyes flicked to Nathan. His breathing steadied. And in a sudden move he ignored the device and positioned himself between the intruders and the back door. The man with the combed hair smiled again. "Impressive. Very impressive. But that dog isn't yours, Mr. Brooks. He belongs to the government, and we need him back." Nathan stepped forward. His voice was low, but its firmness cut the air. "Then bring an official order. Until then, he's under my care. And if you try anything, you'll find out." The third figure, a blonde woman with a steely gaze, didn't say a word. She just stared at Guardian with an intensity that made his fur bristle. "We'll be back," the leader said before leaving, his smile not reaching his eyes. When the door closed, silence returned to the clinic. Emily stepped closer to Nathan and said what he already knew. That wasn't a warning. That was a threat. Fog had settled over the coast like a morning veil, hiding the world in grey tones and muffled whispers. Nathan Brooks hadn't slept. He stayed awake, sitting on the porch with a flashlight in hand and an old rifle by his side. Guardian, lying at his feet, breathed slowly but stayed alert, as if sharing the watch in a silent pact. The day before had changed everything. Those strangers weren't regular agents. They knew more than they let on, and they hadn't come to ask. They'd come to take something they thought was theirs. Just before dawn, something moved in the bushes near the cliff's edge. Guardian reacted first. He sprang up, no bark, no growl, just a quick, precise move toward the darkness. Nathan followed, rifle in hand. Dew soaked his boots as he tracked the dog to a rocky outcrop rarely visited. There, between two wet boulders, a man crouched, soaked, bleeding from his scalp, lips cracked from cold and effort. Nathan raised the flashlight. The man's eyes squinted against the light, but something else happened. Guardian froze. He recognized him. Not with doubt, but with fierce certainty. He approached slowly, sniffing until his snout touched the man's forehead. Then, with a low, deep whimper, full of pain, the dog lay beside him, resting his head on the man's chest like he was guarding a lost treasure. Who is he?" Nathan muttered, still not lowering the rifle. The man barely managed to speak. Daniel Carter." Nathan felt the name hit like an anchor in his gut. Mike had mentioned him, the missing operative, the one tied to Guardian, the one everyone thought died in Operation Blackout. Nathan lowered the rifle slowly and knelt beside the man. Daniel's skin was pale, his lips blue from hypothermia. Nathan helped him up carefully, guiding him back to the cabin, with Guardian never leaving his side. Hours later, wrapped in blankets, Daniel spoke with a weak but steady voice. His story was an open wound. "We were betrayed. The operation was sabotaged from the inside. Guardian kept me alive even when I didn't want to go on. He guided me in the dark. I swam, with him tied to me. The current dragged us both, but he kept me afloat, until a wave tore us apart." Nathan listened without interrupting. Emily, sitting nearby with a mug of tea, couldn't take her eyes off Daniel's blank gaze, which, though clouded, moved precisely with every voice. "Can you see anything?" she asked softly. "Shadows, outlines, sometimes light, but Guardian was my eyes. Not just in the field, in everything. He anticipated me, guided me, protected me." Guardian, lying at his feet, made a soft sound, like he was confirming every word. "He's carrying something else, isn't he?" Nathan said finally. "Not just training. The chip. What's in it?" Daniel nodded with effort. "Data. Proof of the sabotage. Recordings, locations, enough to ruin careers. And that's why they want us silenced." Nathan leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of a truth wrapping around him like an invisible net. He'd pulled something from the sea, yes. But it wasn't just a dog. It was a bond, a witness, A living threat to powerful people. Emily broke the silence. Then there's no going back. They'll come for you, for all of us. No one answered. They didn't need to. Rain fell again that night, like a warning from the sky. Steady drips hit the cabin's roof as the fire crackled in the hearth. Inside, the air was thick. The warmth of the home couldn't melt the feeling that something was coming. Daniel Carter slept on the couch, wrapped in blankets, a bandage over his eyes, his face calm for the first time in days. Emily Harper moved quietly in the kitchen, brewing a valerian tea. Nathan Brooks stood by the window, watching the sea like he was waiting for an enemy he knew well, even if he'd never seen its face. Guardian didn't sleep. Sitting by the front door, his body was a taut line, eyes fixed on something beyond the walls, ears tuned to the slightest disturbance. He knew. At 2:32 a.m., it came. A faint snap from outside. Nathan raised his rifle instinctively. Emily killed the kitchen light. Guardian growled but didn't move, a living trap. Daniel woke like he already knew. He sat up on the couch, feeling around. "They're coming for us," he said, his voice steady, no trace of doubt. And then, without warning, the back door exploded. Men in black, faces covered, stormed in with tactical precision. No sound but their coordinated steps and the soft click of electronic gear activating. Nathan fired a shot, more to disorient than to hit. Emily grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him toward the basement stairs, hidden under the living room rug. But Guardian was faster than anyone. In a burst of motion, the dog launched at the first intruder, knocking him down with surgical accuracy. He didn't bite out of instinct. He attacked with method as trained. The second man tried the sonic device that had once made him hesitate, but Guardian ignored the piercing sound. His eyes were locked on Nathan. He'd chosen a new partner. Nathan moved through the house like a ghost from his past, every step recalling his years in open sea operations. Hearing a muffled scream from Emily's room, he bolted there. One of the men had broken off and reached her. But before Nathan could act, Guardian appeared behind and sank his teeth into the man's armed hand, forcing him to drop the knife. "Behind you!" Daniel shouted from the basement, guided by sound, not sight. Nathan spun just in time to see the operations leader, the same slick-haired man from the clinic, raise a short-barreled gun, aimed at his chest. But something stopped the shot. Guardian, now between them, stared at the man with a look that wasn't animal. It was a promise forged in the abyss. The intruder hesitated. His hand shook. And in that split second, Nathan seized the moment, disarming him with a sharp blow to the jaw. Minutes later, with the attackers bound, knocked out, or fleeing, the cabin was a wreck. Broken glass, overturned furniture, and the thick smell of gunpowder hung in the air. But they were alive. Daniel emerged from the basement, forehead slick with sweat, eyes veiled by darkness. "They'll come back," he said, not angry, just certain. "We're not waiting for that," Nathan replied. Emily looked at Guardian, now with a shallow blade wound on his flank, but standing, alert, unbeatable. "We need to get what's inside him, the chip, before they do." Daniel nodded. "And release it. Make it public. If that data gets out, they can't hunt us in the shadows anymore." Nathan clenched his jaw, feeling the tides had shifted for good. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were witnesses, and the hunter's time was running out. The first light of dawn filtered through the cabin's shattered windows. Outside, the sea crashed hard against the rocks, as if it felt the tremor of the new day. Inside, silence weighed heavy. Not the silence of fear, but of exhaustion after the storm, the kind only those who've faced death know. Guardian, with a makeshift bandage on his left flank, lay at Daniel Carter's feet, not making a sound. His eyes, always watchful, now seemed almost human. Daniel, sitting at the table, leaned forward, holding the tiny microchip extracted just an hour earlier, thanks to Emily Harper's steady hands, which, though not a surgeon's, had pulled off the impossible. Nathan Brooks watched the scene quietly, leaning against the doorframe, an unlit cigarette between his fingers. His eyes were red, not from tiredness, but from a decision growing stronger every minute. The world had to know. Mike Sullivan arrived at dawn, called by a coded message Nathan sent after the attack. The old veteran stepped into the cabin expecting wreckage, but when he saw Daniel, he paused. His hardened face softened for a second. They shook hands in silence. There was history there, one neither dared voice. "Is it all there?" Mike asked, nodding at the chip. Daniel nodded. Voice recordings, locations of unauthorized ops, transfer codes, internal communications, all of Project Blackout. And proof the higher-ups knew, and let us be sacrificed. Mike pulled a rugged laptop from his bag. The device looked like a war relic, but its interface was quick and sharp. They plugged in the chip. Data spilled out like a digital hemorrhage. Names, timestamps, aerial photos, audio files of authoritative voices giving orders that doomed lives. Emily, standing with arms crossed, whispered, "We'll be hunted the second this goes public." "We already are," Nathan replied with a tired half-smile. Daniel leaned forward, his hand brushing Guardian's head. "But now, they'll be chasing shadows, because the truth will light it all up." That's when they made the call. Mike, using old contacts in military press, would send the full data to an independent journalist with a track record of exposés. Sarah Bennett, a former war correspondent, now virtually exiled after uncovering scandals in Eastern Europe. No one else had her guts or her reach. "In less than 24 hours, this'll be on every screen," Mike said, after setting up security and encryption protocols. Nathan stepped outside to breathe. The sun was rising over the sea, gilding the restless water. He walked to the cliff's edge where it all began and stood in silence. Guardian followed. He stopped beside him and looked at the horizon too. No sound, just the wind and the beat of his own heart. Nathan knelt and without a word ran his hand over the dog's neck. "I don't know why you ended up with me, old friend, but I think it was to remind me who I was, who I can still be." Guardian leaned in, resting his head on Nathan's shoulder. The truth was about to break, and with it, judgment would come. But for once, Nathan wasn't afraid. He felt something close to redemption. The world didn't change overnight. No explosions, no dramatic government collapses, no televised confessions on every channel. But something did crack. 24 hours after sending the chip to Sarah Bennett, the data hit a secure network, accessible only through temporary codes. Within 10 minutes, copies started spreading. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. Project Blackout, once buried under layers of institutional silence, now danced in the hands of journalists, activists, and global security experts. The audio recordings hit hardest. One voice, identified by forensic software, belonged to Admiral James Thornton, a respected figure in U.S. naval operations. He ordered with cold precision the abandonment of 3 special units to protect secrets above presidential authority. Among those units, Daniel Carter's. The scandal was instant. Sarah Bennett appeared in a live broadcast, her face shadowed to hide her location, but her voice firm and unyielding. She detailed the files, read excerpts, exposed the shadow structure controlling secret missions with modified tactical guide dogs. With every word, the world felt a little less naive. "This isn't about betrayal," she said. "It's about accountability, about humanity, about men and animals treated like disposable tools." Meanwhile, in the coastal cabin, Nathan, Daniel, Emily, and Mike watched the fallout like they were inside a hurricane. They didn't know when the counterattack would come, but they knew it would, and it did. The next night, unmarked vehicles surrounded the village. Lights off, comms jammed. The attackers wore no uniforms, but their disciplined moves screamed military training. They weren't just after evidence. They were here to erase witnesses. Mike, always a step ahead, had prepped escape routes along the cliff trail. Nathan and Daniel helped camouflage Emily's car under leaves and tarps, while Guardian, still healing, stayed glued to his old partner. It was Daniel who insisted, "I'll stay." Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me. "If they find me, you all have a shot." "No," Nathan said with unexpected steel. "They want us all. We escape together or not at all." When the attackers stormed the cabin, this time with open force, they found only looped recordings and sonic traps that scrambled their thermal sensors. The escape trail was already cloaked in fog and distance. For hours, they trekked through cliffs and damp forests, guided by Mike and Daniel's verbal cues, who seemed to feel the terrain better than anyone. Emily kept Guardian moving, pressing a reinforced bandage against his wounded flank. He limped but didn't falter. At dawn, they reached an abandoned property 70 miles north, an old weather station where Mike had served in the 90s. There, with basic gear and a direct line to Sarah, they got news no one expected. Thornton had resigned. Public pressure, paired with internal investigations and the massive data leak, forced the admiral into a formal statement. On national TV, under heavy scrutiny, he said, "I take full responsibility for operational decisions I now recognize as morally wrong. I step down effective immediately." No apology, just a cold admission. But the damage was done. Daniel listened to the broadcast with clouded eyes and a tight jaw. "It's not enough," he said after a long silence. "But it's a start," Emily whispered, looking at Guardian, who finally slept beside her for the first time in days. Nathan watched from a distance. The world had noticed them, but it hadn't accepted them yet. They'd be heroes to some, traitors to others, but above all, they were survivors, and now bearers of a truth that would never go quiet again. 14 months passed. The waters off the coast where it all began still broke against the rocks with the same ancient rhythm. The world, meanwhile, had spun, shuddered, and then, as it does, moved on. But for those who lived through the storm, nothing was ever the same. Nathan Brooks' old cabin had been rebuilt. Not the same. Brighter, more open to the sea, with wide windows and light curtains that let the breeze in without asking. A different man lived there now, no longer the solitary, silent fisherman. Nathan had become a mentor to young volunteer Coast Guard rescuers, teaching diving, rescue and survival skills, but above all, instinct, trust and loyalty. Daniel Carter carried on with partial vision in his left eye, enough to make out shapes and shadows, but not enough to navigate alone. Still, he walked confidently through the streets of Bayview, the small town that took him in after the scandal. He now worked with the Nightfall Guide Foundation, created in memory of the operatives lost in blackout. The foundation trained guide dogs for veterans with visual and psychological disabilities, and it had a very special instructor, Guardian, with a new tag on his neck, now engraved with his full name, civilian ID, and the inscription, "Protected in the dark, guides in the light." The German Shepherd was a living legend, not for his covert ops feats, but because quietly he guided kids with visual impairments along the beach, helped recovering soldiers regain emotional balance, and every afternoon, without fail, sat beside Daniel on the pier bench, staring at the sea like he recognized old ghosts, but no longer feared them. Emily Harper didn't return to the coastal clinic. She was now director of a vet center, funded by the foundation, specializing in rehabilitating working dogs with physical and mental trauma. Her once quiet voice became a constant in conferences and debates on animal rights in conflict zones. She no longer said she wanted silence. Now she wanted to be heard. Mike Sullivan retired for good to his auto shop, but still got letters from veterans, grateful families, and young people inspired by the scandal to demand military transparency. He chuckled, sipping coffee amid motor oil, knowing something sparked by a chip hidden under a tag had ignited global debates. And the enemies? Some vanished quietly. Others faced closed-door trials. Thornton got 10 years of house arrest, his name erased from public records, but the real story was preserved. In servers, in books, in the eyes of those who stood firm. In the final scene, a child walks along the beach, barefoot toes touching the tide's foam. Ahead, Guardian guides her calmly, steering clear of rocks and footprints in the sand. In the distance, Daniel watches with a quiet smile. Nathan, standing beside him, takes a deep breath. "In the end," he says, eyes on the sea, "some rescues aren't made in the water. They're made here." He touches his chest. "Where we've lost ourselves most." Daniel nods. "And where we can still find ourselves." The sun sets slowly, and for a moment the world feels at peace. Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.